What if I told you that one late-night comedian could put Disney's multi-billion-dollar NFL deal at risk? And Bob Iger might walk away without taking the blame. This isn't just about Jimmy Kimmel, it's about the future of Disney. And the chaos the next CEO could be forced to clean up. Disney's leadership is once again under scrutiny. And this time, it's Bob Iger who has put the company in a precarious position. By bringing Jimmy Kimmel back on air, Iger may have opened the door to fallout that won't fully land on him, but rather on whoever steps in as Disney's next CEO. Iger himself could exit with his reputation intact, while the company shoulders the financial and regulatory consequences. Critics argue that Iger's decision reflects a troubling pattern, one where Disney's long-term stability is sacrificed for short-term optics. While Kimmel's reinstatement may win Iger applause among certain circles, Disney's investors could face real frustration. This isn't just about late-night television, it's about the ripple effects that could stretch all the way to Disney's billion-dollar partnerships. A recent report from the New York Post, citing front office sports, highlights the stakes. Disney may soon be forced to choose between keeping its late-night programming intact and preserving its lucrative NFL deal. ESPN, a Disney property, just entered a landmark agreement with the league, trading a 10% equity stake valued between $2 and $3 billion for control over NFL Network, Red Zone, and fantasy football assets. That arrangement could be jeopardized if the wrong political or regulatory pressure builds. The timing could hardly be worse. Jimmy Kimmel Live had been temporarily pulled following the host's controversial remarks about Charlie Kirk, a move that coincided with heightened FCC scrutiny of another major Disney-involved merger. Nexstar's $6.2 billion Tegna acquisition. Insiders warned that regulatory bodies, and possibly even the White House itself, might take a harder look at Disney's NFL pact because of these controversies. Adding to the intrigue, ABC's daytime flagship, The View, remained conspicuously silent on Kimmel's situation right up until his return was essentially guaranteed. Only then did hosts like Whoopi Goldberg speak out, signaling that Disney wanted to keep tensions muted until its ESPN NFL deal was safely in place. That calculated silence suggests just how delicate the negotiations really were. Yet by bringing Kimmel back into the spotlight, Disney may have reignited the very regulatory concerns it had tried to avoid. Any perception that ESPN and the NFL are building an unfair monopoly could trigger new resistance from consumer protection agencies and trade regulators. What began as a programming choice could now snowball into a billion-dollar problem. And while Bob Iger may ultimately step away without facing direct consequences, the company he leaves behind could be stuck untangling the mess. The next leadership team will inherit the fallout, balancing shareholder frustration, regulatory hurdles, and the reputational risks Disney has created for itself.
And Disney's pending NFL deal. Insiders warned front office sports that the commander-in-chief could seek to torpedo the ESPN NFL pact. Now, I don't know about that. All that speculation. I will say that they are not making friends with anybody in the administration that they're going to have to deal with. And Bob won't be there to deal with this. But next year, after he reportedly, allegedly leaves Disney, they got to get this passed through a bunch of different regulatory sources to let ESPN and NFL semi-quasi merge. And folks, if you want to know just how on the verge Disney was of not keeping Jimmy, they kept The View completely silent all the way up until just before they had the deal. And then suddenly Whoopi Goldberg declared, "No one silences us. Nobody puts Whoopi in a corner," as The View breaks silence on Jimmy Kimmel, but only once his ABC return was imminent. So they didn't say a word until Disney had the deal basically done. And then it was like, okay, you can talk about it now. You can talk about it now. But talking about it now and bringing back Jimmy also puts billions of dollars.
The timing of Jimmy Kimmel's return wasn't accidental. Reports from Hollywood trade outlets suggest that Disney finalized the deal to bring him back earlier in the day, only to have The View break its silence a few hours later. The sequence wasn't coincidental, it was carefully orchestrated. Disney cast itself as the heroic defender of free speech, the benevolent company swooping in to save Kimmel from unfair criticism. But in truth, the decision had already been sealed long before the cameras started rolling. This calculated narrative fits a pattern. Disney has long curated its public image as both a cultural tastemaker and a progressive corporate leader, carefully choosing when to appear bold and when to retreat. Yet behind the curtain, decisions are often transactional, less about principle and more about positioning. Kimmel's reinstatement is no different. What looked like a principled defense of one of its stars was, in reality, a move timed for maximum optics with minimal accountability. And the narrative that Disney doesn't silence its talent doesn't hold water. Consider Sunny Hostin, co-host of The View. On several occasions, she's had to walk back or soften her comments, sometimes within a single news cycle, whether you call it corporate pressure, brand management, or good old-fashioned censorship. The pattern is clear. Disney allows its talent to speak freely only when it aligns with corporate strategy. The rest is carefully stage-managed, adding another layer of intrigue. Former White House press secretary Ari Fleischer weighed in through the New York Post. His point was blunt. Given Donald Trump's history of using media mergers and high-profile deals as bargaining chips, it's unlikely he'll let Disney's ESPN NFL partnership move forward without friction. As Fleischer put it, this won't be a straightforward commercial transaction. That observation cuts to the heart of Disney's dilemma. Why would Trump war regulators under any administration go easy on a company that has openly antagonized conservatives, courted cultural battles, and wrapped itself in a veneer of ideological posturing? Disney's recent moves, from politically charged content decisions to high-profile disputes with state officials, have already attracted scrutiny. Now, as it pushes forward with a semi-merger between ESPN and the NFL that would even integrate sports gambling into Disney's digital ecosystem, the scrutiny can only intensify. The reasoning is simple. Regulators are not inclined to reward companies that play hardball in the cultural arena while asking for favorable treatment in the financial one. Disney may have convinced itself that its cultural capital insulates it from pushback, but history suggests otherwise. From AT&T's struggles with the Time Warner merger to Paramount's difficulties with CBS, media giants that overplay their hand often find themselves facing unexpected resistance from regulators, who are more than happy to remind them of their limits. This brings us to the heart of the issue. Has Bob Iger, in exchange for short-term applause and political goodwill, saddled his successor with a minefield of shareholder outrage, regulatory entanglements, and cultural backlash? If so, the celebration on The View may look less like a genuine victory and more like an expensive illusion. At stake is far more than a late-night talk show. ESPN's blockbuster arrangement with the NFL, valued between $2 and $3 billion, involves trading a significant equity stake in exchange for valuable assets: the NFL Network, Red Zone, and fantasy football platforms. These aren't trivial they are key growth engines in an era when traditional cable subscriptions are declining and digital sports engagement is skyrocketing. .com integrating these assets with Disney's digital platforms, including its streaming services, could be transformative, but it also raises red flags. By linking ESPN so tightly with the NFL, the deal edges toward monopoly territory, especially if combined with the rollout of sports betting features directly into Disney's apps. Critics argue that the arrangement gives Disney disproportionate control over not just content distribution but also the future of sports-related digital commerce. For regulators already wary of big tech's dominance, this may feel like déjà vu. For Disney shareholders, the timing could not be worse. The company is still reeling from stock volatility, theme park struggles, and questions about its streaming profitability. Adding a multi-billion-dollar deal that might collapse under political or regulatory pressure could intensify investor frustration. If the ESPN and NFL pact fails, the blame will not fall on Bob Iger. He will have exited with his legacy intact. Instead, it will land squarely on the shoulders of his successor, likely Josh D'Amaro. Imagine stepping into the CEO role only to inherit a half-broken, politically charged deal that regulators are skeptical of. That's the situation D'Amaro may face. Worse, if the NFL senses weakness or prolonged delays, it has other suitors. The league doesn't need ESPN nearly as much as ESPN needs the league. Disney could find itself left out in the cold, having gambled its chips on Kimmel's reinstatement and the appearance of cultural solidarity. Disney's use of The View to trumpet Kimmel's return was not just opportunistic, it was strategic. By funneling the message through Goldberg and her co-hosts, Disney created a layer of insulation, instead of Iger himself taking the heat. The cultural debate played out through daytime television of space, where the audience was already inclined to applaud the decision. In a sense, Whoopi Goldberg and her colleagues became Bob Iger's bubble wrap. They absorbed the criticism, reframed the narrative, and gave Disney cover. And Hollywood's response, though tepid, provided enough symbolic support to lend the move credibility. Even actors like Mark Ruffalo, who hasn't appeared on Kimmel's show in nearly a decade, suddenly found themselves portrayed as part of a groundswell of celebrity backing. But symbolism can only carry a company so far. Shareholders don't measure success in applause or virtue points. They measure it in earnings, growth, and stability. If cultural theater undermines financial outcomes, patience will run thin. And the truth is, Kimmel himself is not the juggernaut he once was. Ratings for late-night television have been steadily eroding for years. His value lies less in drawing viewers than in serving as a cultural icon for certain segments of Hollywood. That is why Fleischer's warning about Trump's potential involvement matters so much. Political forces may decide that making an example of Disney is worth more than letting its business plans sail smoothly. The tension between media companies, politics, and regulation is not new. Paramount's recent merger challenges demonstrated how unchecked talent and cultural controversies can create roadblocks for business deals. AT&T's struggles with the Time Warner acquisition revealed how political considerations, especially during the Trump era, can complicate what would otherwise appear to be straightforward corporate transactions. Disney now finds itself in a similar situation. By tethering its fortunes to both a controversial late-night host and a politically fraught NFL partnership, it risks repeating the mistakes of its competitors. At the heart of all this lies a deeper identity crisis for Disney. Once the gold standard of family-friendly entertainment, the company now often finds itself at the center of cultural and political storms. Some hail this as a company embracing its role as a cultural actor. Others see it as reckless, an abandonment of neutrality that alienates half its customer base. Bob Iger, for all his business acumen, has leaned heavily into the former. But as he prepares to leave the stage, the question becomes, was it worth it? Was the applause of cultural allies worth jeopardizing billion-dollar partnerships, alienating large swaths of consumers, and placing his successor in an almost untenable position? In the end, the Kimmel saga may be remembered less for what it meant in the moment and more for what it symbolized. A company willing to gamble its financial future for the sake of political posturing. If the NFL deal falters, if regulators push back, or if shareholders lose faith, the victory lap on The View will look less like a bold move and more like a dangerous miscalculation. Disney has always been a company built on stories, but sometimes, even the best storytellers forget that reality cannot be spun away.
Like right away, I think this is a kick the can down the road kind of a situation, and if anybody does that, more often than Iger, you're going to need to point him out. This is the guy that left a lot of stumbling blocks ahead for Bob Chapek, and basically bailed on a company when he knew that it was about to get very globally tough as far as conducting business. He was in lockstep with Governor Gavin Newsom. Sorry, it's so hard for me to say that guy's name. Anyway,
Jonas
the Joker.
Isn't here, and you guys just go nuts.
The Joker, right? The Joker, when shutting down the parks in California, at least in Florida, the governor there woke up and realized, oh, this is nonsense. We're not doing business. We need business. We need tourism. And just like, smarter heads prevailed at a time when we were under another tragedy just a couple decades earlier, when we had people crashing planes into towers. So it's like, this is a guy who kicks every can down the road and removes inconvenience from himself more so than from the company, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring to the idea that Disney settled this so quickly, because it was going to be inconvenient for Dana Walden, Bob Iger, and Willow Bay if they couldn't have their speech, their fundraiser, their super fun time at their home in Brentwood.
At its core, this controversy stems from Disney choosing to protect Jimmy Kimmel after he made deeply misleading remarks about a national tragedy, statements that critics argue shifted blame onto the victim. Rather than taking meaningful action, Disney opted for a brief suspension and then brushed the issue aside as simply being insensitive. That response was not only inadequate, but factually misleading. And yet, once the backlash cooled slightly, Disney framed Kimmel's return as a triumph, even using The View to run a victory lap, as though the controversy had never existed. The risk, however, extends far beyond Kimmel's late-night show. By attaching itself to his defense, Disney has placed its multi-billion-dollar NFL partnership in jeopardy. It's like a captain deliberately nudging the Titanic toward an iceberg, perhaps to appease passengers for the moment. but leaving the crew to deal with the wreckage later. Bob Iger may not be around to handle the fallout, but his likely successor, Josh D'Amaro, could be left managing the consequences if regulators balk at approving the deal. The irony here is striking. Even NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, often criticized for his own corporate virtue signaling, has reportedly tried to keep tensions cool. For him to appear as the cautious voice is telling and concerning for shareholders who expect Disney's leadership to keep its talent in check, especially when billions of dollars are on the line. History offers plenty of cautionary tales, like Paramount's merger struggles, where uncontrolled talent fueled regulatory skepticism. Disney risks repeating the same mistake. If Kimmel continues with unchecked commentary, the ESPN NFL deal could easily collapse, and that burden will fall on D'Amaro. In fact, some insiders believe this situation all but confirms he will be the next CEO. Given that Dana Walden's name is already tied up in the Kimmel controversy, should the deal unravel, Disney's shareholders will know exactly who inherited the mess. Strategically, Disney's use of The View to break its silence on the issue was clever, if transparent. By having Whoopi Goldberg and her co-hosts declare that nobody silences us, the company shielded itself behind layers of celebrity commentary. In effect, Goldberg became Bob Iger's buffer, absorbing the public debate so that Iger himself wouldn't have to. Supportive Hollywood figures rallied behind Kimmel in principle, even if many, like Mark Ruffalo, hadn't appeared on his show in nearly a decade. What mattered wasn't the man himself, but the idea of him, a symbolic figure for their cause. This tactic wasn't new for Disney. For years, the company has relied on celebrity surrogates to carry its cultural battles, insulating leadership from direct exposure. Whether it's Marvel stars defending creative decisions, Star Wars actors framing controversies as fandom problems, or daytime talk show personalities echoing corporate narratives, the pattern is consistent. Disney outsources its messaging to trusted voices who can humanize the company's choices while keeping executives out of the firing line. In a media ecosystem that thrives on personality-driven narratives, this strategy is undeniably effective, but it also creates a distortion. The focus shifts away from corporate accountability and onto cultural theater, and that distortion is particularly useful when the subject is Jimmy Kimmel. Kimmel himself is not a ratings powerhouse anymore. The late-night format, once a cultural touchstone, has been in steady decline across the board. Viewership has fractured. Younger audiences increasingly consume clips on social media rather than watch nightly broadcasts, and streaming platforms dominate attention. In other words, Kimmel's actual business value is limited, yet his symbolic value remains potent. To many in Hollywood, he is a reliable voice, a steady hand in the cultural wars, and an entertainer who represents the right side of certain political arguments. For Disney, this symbolic weight is more valuable than Nielsen numbers. It transforms Kimmel into a cultural pawn whose worth lies not in comedy, but in identity. That is why Ruffalo's absence from Kimmel's stage for nearly a decade didn't matter. It wasn't about their personal relationship or even Kimmel's individual platform. It was about what his presence signified: loyalty to the tribe, affirmation of values, and resistance to critics. In this context, Kimmel is less a host than a flag bearer. And when Disney stood behind him, the company wasn't just defending an employee, it was signaling to its cultural allies that it remains firmly in their camp. The problem, however, is that symbolic loyalty carries real costs. For the next Disney CEO, whether Josh D'Amaro or another contender, the fallout could be significant. By positioning itself so strongly on Kimmel's side, Disney risks alienating regulators, shareholders, and entire swaths of its consumer base. The question isn't whether Hollywood insiders will continue to cheer the decision, they almost certainly will. The real question is whether the billions tied up in ESPN's NFL partnership, the fragile confidence of investors, and the trust of a broad audience can withstand the turbulence that comes with such moves. History shows that companies paying too much attention to cultural applause often stumble in financial terms. Netflix, for instance, spent years indulging in content strategies that earned it symbolic victories but left its balance sheet strained, leading to layoffs and retractions. AT&T, after pouring billions into Warner Media, discovered that political battles and culture clashes around CNN and HBO programming became distractions from its core mission. Even Paramount's recent merger troubles revealed the danger of talent-driven controversies derailing business negotiations. Disney is not immune. If anything, its scale and visibility make it even more vulnerable. And while Iger may be praised for his savvy maneuvering, his successor inherits the risk. If the ESPN NFL deal comes under heightened scrutiny because regulators perceive Disney as politically reckless, who shoulders the blame? Not Iger. He will be gone, basking in his carefully preserved legacy. It will be the new CEO left to explain why a multi-billion-dollar partnership was jeopardized over the symbolic defense of a late-night comedian whose ratings have been dwindling for years. That is not just poor optics. It is potentially disastrous leadership handoff. The irony is that the very people Disney is trying to please may not even care deeply about Kimmel himself. Hollywood's defense of him feels less about his comedic chops or his show's relevance and more about the idea of solidarity. He's our guy, the thinking goes, and if he's attacked, then we're attacked. This tribal instinct is powerful, but it's also fragile. Once the winds shift, symbolic loyalty can fade. Just ask countless celebrities and executives once hailed as untouchable, only to be discarded when the cultural moment moved on. Disney is gambling that Kimmel's symbolic value will endure long enough to justify the risks. But corporate strategy built on cultural symbolism rarely ends smoothly. There's also the consumer side to consider. Audiences today are more aware than ever of the politics behind entertainment. Some embrace it, while others reject it outright. Disney's decision to stand so firmly with Kimmel may bolster loyalty among a segment of its base, but it risks alienating millions who see the move as proof of the company's disregard for balance and neutrality. This consumer divide may not manifest in immediate boycotts or collapsed ticket sales, but over time, it chips away at brand trust. And for Disney, a company built on decades of being the safe, universal choice for families, that erosion could prove far more damaging than any one merger's failure. Supporters might argue that Disney had no choice, that abandoning Kimmel would have appeared cowardly, emboldened critics, and alienated Hollywood allies. But this is a false dichotomy. Disney could have handled the situation with more nuance, balancing accountability with support, ensuring that the company's broader financial interests were not imperiled by a single personality. Instead, it chose spectacle, deploying The View as its stage and Goldberg as its shield. That decision may win the day in the court of cultural opinion, but in the boardroom, it raises eyebrows. Ultimately, what matters most isn't Kimmel's future, but Disney's. The company has positioned itself in a way that makes its cultural alliances more visible than its business strategy. The reliance on symbolic figures like Kimmel to communicate corporate identity is risky, especially when the stakes involve billion-dollar partnerships, regulatory approval, and global brand perception. For the next CEO, the challenge will not be to defend Kimmel or even to explain why Disney sided with him. The challenge will be to rebuild a narrative where the company is measured not by symbolic loyalty, but by sustainable business success. Kimmel may continue to crack jokes, Goldberg may continue to declare independence, and Hollywood may continue to rally behind its chosen figures. But at the end of the day, those are performances. Shareholders, regulators, and consumers are watching a different stage, the one where profits, partnerships, and credibility are on the line. Disney may have won applause in the moment, but whether that applause translates into lasting value is a question that its next leadership team will have to answer. And if history is any guide, the bill for today's symbolic victories often comes due tomorrow.